Well, hi everyone. I'm Jonathan Byer,
And I'm Dave Lees.
and this is a little snapshot of sort of what we're doing on the TSL Visionaries book club, where we already had our meeting on the John Curry book, which was incredible. And next up, we're doing the Nureyev. So this week, obviously, hot off the presses, we had to read. I listened to Gracie read her new book, which is entitled. Dave, take it.
Oh, out of shape, worthless loser. Why do you make me say the bad title, Jonathan?
You
Why
want
am
to
I
know
the
why?
bad guy?
Because I couldn't totally remember all of the negative things in the title. It's like, is it out of shape, useless, no good, terrible, rotten,
When you
loser?
made me say it, I thought, wait, is there a swear word in there?
Yeah,
Because
I one
Gracie's
one one.
she likes to drop an F bomb on Audible. By the way, she's an incredible Audible
Oh yeah, it was very interesting because, of course, I also listened to the John Curry book, which was narrated by a third party, obviously. But when you hear the words from the author themselves recounting these stories, it hits different.
narrator. Yeah. And if someone writes a memoir and they don't read it, like there are certain people you want them to read their memoirs. And when
Especially this one is laden with a lot of dark humor, a lot of sort of like deadpan jokes that I want to hear in her voice because I would inevitably read it and someone else would read it with a totally different inflection.
Yeah. Like when Hillary Clinton wrote Hard Choices and she didn't read her own audiobook, well, that was a hard choice. That was incorrect, Hillary. Okay. I need to hear her like suppressed rage coming on every page. I put the book down because I was like, I don't want to hear this woman.
Yeah,
No.
there's a disconnect then. Yeah,
Yeah,
it becomes less personal. Did Barbara read her 800 hours of her book or who read that?
she sure did. Okay.
And I would imagine tough to record. I mean, some of these things would be hard to recount in real time, and you could sort of hear some. I don't mean this like it ruined the experience or anything, but you could hear when they had to edit out for a second, and then like she sort of put in a new splice, and they were often during tricky moments.
Yeah.
I wonder if she needed to take a break, and probably very cathartic for her to then be able to share the book that way by reading it
You
a
have such
lot.
a relationship with the author when they read their own audiobook and you can hear exactly what they meant and exactly what they were thinking.
Right.
And obviously, Gracie had a co-writer who was Karen Krause, who was formerly of the New York Times. And I'm sure there were a lot of writers who were jealous that they didn't get Gracie's book uh, to write this. And Gracie had always said she wanted to write a memoir. Like this was in a discussion for a long time. I had heard when she was with Frank Carroll that she wanted to write a book back then.
Okay. And yet her story had only just begun. I mean, that was, remember, we were reading like Karen Chen wrote a book when she was like 2 years old, it felt like. And I was like, your story's not done.
Did
Like,
you
I
read
don't,
it?
no.
Okay.
Did
Yeah.
you?
No.
No, it looked like one of those, as many skating books have been, sort of a fluffy, geared towards children kind of thing, which this obviously was not. And and it was interesting. I didn't realize it, but Karen had responded to something I had tweeted, which was, and I think you and I had a similar experience reading the book. Is it's very easy to identify with, no matter who you are, what you struggle with, what your field of choice is. There are some universal concepts here that I think it really feels like you are connected and identify with a lot of what she has talked about, or at least that's how I felt.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Oh,
I've had my own struggles with like mental health, and I am in not the same version, but I came up in a field that was also very micromanaged and meticulous and toxic at times. And these sorts of lessons apply to everything. It is not a skating only book.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
I felt they did a good job of giving us this the skating fandom enough real skating information amidst sort of bigger picture ideas of what were going on with mental health and those sorts of things. And it triggered me like crazy. And I finished it yesterday in less than a period of 24 hours. I had consumed the entire thing. And I was so shaken and processing it and all that stuff. I had to cancel my evening class yesterday because I was like, I don't think I can do it. I
You know
was
that
distracted.
I was hospitalized for a panic attack after reading a memoir by the Nickelodeon actress a couple of years ago. So that was, yeah.
These books that really go there, and
Mhm.
for anyone who's struggled or struggling with similar things, it sits there. It's
Mhm.
intense.
Yeah. I was worried and I think about this and I yeah. I mean, I think anytime you get into I mean, I canceled an interview once. You'll remember one of the early
Right.
ones that we did about the topic of when we were going into perfectionism and stuff. And that was, you know, a dark time that was going on in that discussion. Yeah, there was maybe a gummy associated with that at the time that you talk about those topics and the thoughts go like that. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
thought,
And it brought up a lot of different issues. And even in the foreword, or however they titled it, she talks about that this could be triggering for a lot of people. And the way it was worded about moving forward with like self-compassion and go slow and be kind to yourself as you read this and all this sort of stuff, it just, I'm getting someone who has done a lot of the work, if you,
mm,
and obviously she's talking about, there's a great deal of discussion about the way she was discussed.
mm.
I mean, obviously I'm not immune to that. One as a performer, but I mean, with TSL,
Yeah,
we've
we've discussed
always
her.
discussing her stuff for good or for bad. Some I regret, some I stand by.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things I stand by was when we were sort of seeing her put herself out there, and the narrative was, I'm all better now. That was the way it was presented in the media. And it was so clear from this that our instincts of like, maybe you're not and you're in process and you're doing the best you can. But for some reason, the media push behind Gracie is like, now she's all better, everyone can relax. And I was like, that's not really how this process works for anyone.
I remember, and what I kept thinking back on was the Cup of Russia in 2018 when she went there. And I think we were both really triggered when she went there and we had
Right.
that discussion.
Yeah.
And listen, I've said a lot of things that I regret in my life. So, and I, you know, am realistic about that, and things that I certainly would not say again.
Right.
And you learn from that. And I think at that time, there was something amiss going on. And and the people around her, I mean, she mentioned that one coach who disappeared in the dead of night. And it seemed like there were not like sound voices at that time. And I remembered also we had many sources during the 2016-2017 season when that was down. There were so many of those events. I remember being with Christine when Gracie called herself fat at Skate America. And we had like a really, really big conversation about some of the stuff that was going on in the press room. And I remember talking about whether or not she needed time off. And everyone was like, and there were people that were saying, like, she can't, she's Gracie Gold. And then if then in and but you understand she was on a train, right? Like, and she was talking about the endorsements and everything and talking about it. I remember having that conversation in the media room in Hoffman Estates, which is
Yep.
such a strange like
Yep.
place to be. It sort of looks like a suburban mall. It's like in the middle of nowhere. I think there was one not a Blimpies or something, but like, like it was really isolated. And I remember how dark the energy was and that there was no light in her eyes when she was talking just the whole week that she was there.
Yeah.
Um, and it was weird because she talks about her armor of like, her lipstick and her mascara, But I remember that whole season, the light was not in her eye when you see
Yeah.
someone like that.
And that's such a pivotal moment
Mhm.
when hopefully now, or people that know more about mental health will be like, aha, this is not an indicator that she's a brat or lazy. This is 100% a cry for help, something is off, and she needs to help in addressing whatever's going on here. But as a community, it was sort of met with, what a brat, get over yourself. Because that's how it was really presented to us, was it, and I loved her clarification. She's like, I was not devastated that I was fourth at the world championships and then just was throwing a temper tantrum for the whole next season. She was imploding internally,
Mhm.
and it just continued because there was no time to breathe. And instead of people offering compassion or help, they were offering judgment and tough love, it seemed. And that's hard. And I think something many of us identify with.
Have you ever gone through something so stressful or traumatic that you don't remember a lot of
Yes.
stuff that happened? Yeah. And I think she mentioned that throughout that season. I thought that was interesting and um, very sad. Obviously, we know Scott Dyer, and he was there for a lot of it. And I remember him saying to us that things were not good. And obviously, we're very close with Ann Jensen, who is one of those salt of the earth people that was also present. And I forgot about that she went to Zagreb that year and some of those things. But I remember thinking, like, I remember the discussions we were having, like, she has to pull out, she has to pull out. And they were keep
And she
going.
asked to pull out and
Yeah.
was told no.
Mhm. And there were
And
certain things I was told. I talked to Craig Maritzi the other day, and he was saying that she had said certain things in the book that the publisher like took out. Like was like, that they. I mean, she really went there. It was one of the great sports memoirs that
yeah,
I've read,
and it
and one of
didn't go
the
there in like a listen to this gossip. It was
no,
just 100% just accurate reporting and accounting of events, which we do not experience in this sport. And she really opened up as to why.
yeah, and I have to say, I thought that the arc of the book that she divided it into the different parts of herself. I thought the book ended on a much bigger high, and I was very triggered because I read it over 2 days, which I don't usually do. But for this book, I was like, I gotta like pace this. This is a lot, right? And the part of her life when it's falling apart around like 2017 gets very, very dark, especially if you've ever gone through some of that stuff, like her Detroit period. That's my senior year in college period, right?
Hearing it, the isolating, the self sabotage, the reclusion, like all of this sort of stuff. I think, again, for those of us that have struggled, it was like a ton of bricks on your chest hearing
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, and I think the cries for help and the people not hearing things and all of that, and I thought she articulated it well. There were some dark jokes that I was like, whoa, in there, but I think, in time with a re-listen, it'll be interesting. But what I found is that there was so much growth in the third part of the book that I think when listening to the second part, you weren't sure where it was going.
I agree with you. Where a certain anger and blame and lashing out and this sort of stuff was happening, it was almost like you were really experiencing the journey with her then.
Yeah.
Because she kept it in the moment, not lessons learned from the moment later. She was
Yeah.
recounting it as is. And then as she sort of came back and she was like, no, they didn't help me, but they also weren't mental health professionals. And I didn't know how to ask for help. Like she was saying, Frank was trying to figure it out and I wouldn't let him. Not to say that that puts the blame on Gracie or Frank, but that it was just a really tough situation. Because I think some people going in were like, oh, is this going to be a throwing Frank under the bus book? Which I did not find it was.
Listen, Frank made mistakes, but I think
100%.
also some of it I tried to think back about that about Alex and Frank. Um, but I think knowing people in both environments and also having met both of them, it wasn't a surprise, but also being around Russian coaches or people that grew up with Alex's background and the way that they coach, it wasn't surprising to me. Um, that I think with other people it will be if they're not in an ice rink, but I think if you are, it's not surprising, right? And there's always that discussion. I thought it was really good. I thought it was up there with like, I was thinking about like really good memoirs that I've read. Andre Agassi's, which she mentioned, Open. I thought Scott Hamilton's book, Landing It, was good. There's also an unofficial one where he sat down for all these interviews with an author, which they then used, but they pulled it at the last moment from being an official memoir.
Oh,
And that's like a really fascinating book, but I can understand that if you were a teenager, I don't know how old Scott was in 1982, right? 1981, 1982, maybe you wouldn't want all of those quotes printed in that way until you've had time for reflection and whatnot. And in the heat of the moment, he was telling the guy about his competitors and what he thought. And this is the 80s, probably before these
yeah.
memoirs were a complete genre, right? So that was an interesting, and he was talking to someone that wasn't involved in skating. I thought, like, Allison Ingram for Nellie Olson, and Maureen McCormick also, like, it was up there with some of my favorite memoirs.
It
So I
was
think.
interesting that I loved landing at the
Mhm,
the Scott autobiography, biography, whatever we're calling it. Um, but it was more about him and his skating.
mhm.
This was about Gracie and her skating, but it was the Gracie, the person, and the struggle of someone trying to achieve something that was given a gift and all of the struggles around it. I think it transcended skating perhaps more than the Scott book did. I think that was an amazing memoir. It's mainly for skating fans. I think this, you do not need to be a skating fan to recognize the power of the words.
Yeah, I think our hope eventually with word of mouth that this will go beyond
Yeah,
skating. So I think it deserves to. It was much better than a skating book, and it's not a skating book. It
right.
really isn't. She doesn't spend time. There's no chapter where they explain the jumps to you or what
Right.
those things are. And I thought that, she didn't explain what a sit spin is, right? So I thought that that was interesting. She spoke to people like they were intelligent. I mean, I told Paul Wiley he's not old enough to read it. So I thought I mean, come on. We can't have him listening to some of these jokes that she was making. He can't. No, 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 no,
You're
no.
older. Maybe when you're older, Paul.
Yeah,
Okay.
like, come on. I did ask Karen Kraus, I said, how many times did you blush when she was giving you these interviews? I'm always fascinated when they put books like this together because each author and subject have a different relationship, right?
Right. Well, as we were talking about with the John Curry book, quite
Mhm.
frankly, both of us sort of got the sense that the author of the book, who was a sort of more general sports author as opposed to an arts author, which especially for John Curry was an interesting choice. And although well written, it did seem to have a tone
Mhm.
that maybe the writer wasn't a huge fan of John.
Yeah. So Adam Rappon's book was written with Brian Moylan, who writes recaps on Vulture for The Real Housewives. He also wrote Erica Jane's book with her. So like that's a very
That's the
comedic
vibe
take
they were going for.
in
Yeah.
this one. And I thought both of those books were really great, but in different ways, right? And what she was talking about. So I don't know.
It was
Yeah.
it was just I applaud her for the bravery, because even though she has seemed like someone who has always just said it like it is, especially after that 16-17 season, um, she wasn't really. She was making a dark joke. She was maybe saying something she thought was risque, but the truth. But here it was a different kind of honesty. And I loved that she didn't hold anything back, yet it didn't seem vindictive. And she had a lot of awkward things to write about, and she handled them very fairly. I have to say, the only time she really let it rip, and I kind of just started like pulling up a front seat to the show, was the part about Johnny and Tara.
Yeah. And I had a lot of thoughts about it because it goes into how athletes are covered. And let's be honest, there wasn't one part about Johnny and Tara. There were like three or four, which is also interesting because she's repped by Tara Modlin, who used to rep Johnny. And I thought, whoa, the way that she went there. And then she would like respond to their comments.
Yeah,
And people have a lot of things to say about them. And there were times that when she was saying it, I was like really reflecting on it, thinking about how we cover things and thinking about stuff and thinking about, what's appropriate and not. And there were times that I thought, okay, I understand what they're saying, but maybe the tone is off, right? And I think that Johnny can have a certain sound to his voice sometimes when he is speaking on, and this was their earlier years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't listen to them because I don't like to hear John. I don't like the sound of his voice when he's commentating.
Well, I find it's not serving the skating or the skater, it's serving his own persona for the
I
most.
don't find it authentic in the
Yeah.
way that I found Adam and Ashley to be more authentic, or Gracie's voice. Imagine you put Gracie with Adam and Ashley. Although she was very clear, Ashley and I were not friends. I thought that
Feels like they wanted to paint us as rivals. And I mean, we weren't as much as we were competing against each other. She's like, we certainly weren't friends, but
Mhm.
it also wasn't some cutthroat rivalry. She's like, of course I'd always want to win, but that's because I always want to win in general. I was intrigued what they may think about the book.
I'm a little confused about when people say rivalry and then they always say, well, we weren't rivals. Okay. I think that there's a connotation to that is,
Because she included a rivalry like Tanya and Nancy.
yes. Yeah,
It
no. But they
was
were both intense competitors and they were competing for, they were, listen, they were both gorgeous girls who were very charismatic and very commercial, and they were both
neither one's boyfriend was going to attack the other at a practice.
no, 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 no.
What she was getting at, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but
it was also, I think she brought up a really interesting point when she was talking about Nicole Bobek and Tanya Harding.
yeah.
And she was like, I identify more with those two women than not, even though on paper everyone loved that my family looked a certain way when obviously we know it was quite the opposite behind the scenes. She's like, but Nicole and Tanya always got these raps and were always scolded for acting out with clearly very traumatic upbringings that no one was really talking about except to make a joke. And it
I
was like
think,
maybe
yeah.
Tanya's upbringing wasn't hilarious and some of her early behavior was a result of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And talking about Gracie's parents, I remember posting the article about Carl when it first came out because Gracie's career was the 2016-2017 season when it was free falling, right? And I remember posting it thinking like this will give people context.
Right.
But people want to protect the ice queen, and people were like, how dare you post it? And it was like, it wasn't to embarrass, it's to give the context that there's other stuff going on in her life that
Right.
is huge, right? And the way she went there with both of her parents, which that is her way to do, and it seems like she and her mom have a relationship. I mean, she went there. I was in public waiting for, I get my little breakfast nook, right? And I was like listening to my audiobook out of the corner, and there are like these kind of like trucker guys that are always like in the line in front of me. And she said the thing where she goes, I always think about how many of my father's mistresses have watched me skate on TV. I gasped in public when because she hadn't made a joke that dark
Raw. Yeah.
raw yet. And I'm like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
we are going there.
Yeah.
Okay, right. That is,
I mean, and it was interesting. She gave, when discussing her mother, she tried to give it more context.
mhm.
She tried to be like, this was horrible. She's doing the best she could, this sort of thing. It was clear things with the dad definitely are not great.
Yeah, and it was interesting. Well, there are different things to identify with, but I wonder, and obviously they'll never know, but would there have been some weight issues without skating, right? And some body dysmorphia, because the way that she talked about her mom's,
Her mom did.
her mom did, right? About her mom's attitude towards food. That's something that we all pick up on. And that was something that's very prevalent in my house. I mean, my mom still can't help herself. If my dad goes and gets dessert after dinner, like where we're like watching TV, like she will still comment on that. And they both work out compulsively and now have their pedometers and what, I mean, it's, the apple doesn't fall far from that tree. Okay, I'm just putting it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's been modeled for you.
Well, of course.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, so was there anything that really, I guess, what joke shocked you the most? I have to just say, is there anything that just made you just
That one I should have like been keeping notes on, because she would just throw them out of nowhere. And again, dark humor.
and she had the same agent as Jenny.
Yeah, and the agency stuff was very fascinating to me. How many times on the show has it been discussed, and you have been a big proponent of this, like, why are we sterilizing all of the skaters' personalities in these media zones? And we got our answer.
Well, come on, Lynn, Plage, and Yuki put together, but you think about the roster that they have represented. And I don't think that it's anyone's fault, because they are doing, ostensibly they're doing their job, which is you hire these people and you're supposed to make money for them and for the company, right? But then there's all of these lines, right? Because the other part is that these are teenagers. And one of the thoughts
how you just worded that, though.
What?
You like, the skater is there to make them and IMG the money.
I mean, IMG is, no, I said IMG is there to make the skater and the company.
Oh, yes, yes. And it did not seem that way. It seemed like, as this came, like, it was like, Gracie, don't mess this up for us.
Well, because they represent more than one client. And Jenny's talked about this, like, so Jenny and Kimmy Meisner had the same agent at the same time, right? So then it comes to, well, whose parents do the agent sit with? And those are all very subliminal things that could happen for a number of reasons, but they do impact about how you feel about your chances, right? And those are things that I think people might not even realize. But I mean, come on, Kimmy pushed Jenny out, right? At the end when she was having her own struggles, right? Or that's how it's perceived by the person at the time. But I think it's, a little dark that Gracie, Mariah, Jenny, Isabeau, and Alyssa Liu all have the same agent. That's just dark. I mean, also she's also represented Nathan and Christy Yamaguchi and other people. It's just that connective thread. There's a system in the US of promoting an ice queen that seems
arguably hasn't been going well recently.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes this certainly happens in classical music. IMG, obviously one of the big agencies in classical music, but they're following a formula and need to update it. Because like when Gracie was saying, they were like, uh-oh, someone thinks you're bisexual. And she was like, well, I am. Well, what if someone asks you about it? Well, then I'll tell them I am. What's the big deal?
She goes, do they want me to beat around the bush? No pun intended.
Pun intended. And I was like, that was a pun very much intended.
Her delivery was so good. I thought that she really delivered so well. I know that they said that she was a good narrator, but we saw her on the Today Show and she didn't seem 100% comfortable. And obviously you don't know what they're going to ask you. And if you watched the Today Show, I do find it awkward that, like, Hoda is going to be like, so like trying to imitate Oprah, and Maria Shriver does it too, where they'll be like, Jonathan, what are the lessons you learned? And like Savannah is the hard one, right? So and they like kind of don't match together, but they pretend to. But then like Savannah was trying to interview her, but I find that Savannah could do politics, right? Because Savannah's like Gracie. I think Savannah could go out there and land a triple Lutz. Like she has that in her, right?
Okay.
But when Savannah tries to go soft or tries to like steer it, and then she like tried to like change the tone in her voice, which you practice as a broadcaster. And I could just, you would like watching Gracie, I didn't feel like there was an authentic connection. Also, those interviews are so condensed in terms of a short period of time that I think and you're like, can imagine that you have like a 5 or 6 minute segment and they're like, so let's talk about your anorexia and your father stealing urine, right? And you just be like, wow, okay.
Let's talk about your life, your entire massive trajectory of all of these things that have happened, let's make it a couple of quick sound bites in between commercial breaks. And I saw her, I felt also little guarded. It
Mhm.
felt a little guarded. And it's interesting how she was talking about how they're treated on these shows sometimes. I found it very insightful. I hear a lot from my female colleagues in opera how different their experiences are than mine as a gay man or a straight man, whatever. When she was talking about having to go on the show and she had to wear her cute little outfit for, you know, we had to wear a cute little skating dress next to Kevin Hart making jokes about it. She was like, but there were male athletes, they're not required to wear their uniform. Why
Mm.
did I have to be this dress up doll? Um, I think often these media moments put them in really awkward positions. It's
Yeah.
cringe at times.
And everybody did love her name, and everybody does take the pun. But of course they're going to take the pun, right? And it does work for clickbait. But yeah, before Sochi, there was a lot of articles and a lot of buzz around her, obviously. And
Which is when you're inside the skating community as a fan, you knew that Gracie's fourth place finish was a wonderful accomplishment for her. But now they've sold to the public like she really had a shot at the gold. But you're like, but if you've been following internationally, she's at the very beginning. She's like figuring things out. Like there are some major competitors here. Like a top four finish was a huge get for Gracie, I thought. But again, as she talked about how complex and horrible the number four can be.
mhm. I think at the time, it and we, covered it then. I always thought that her fourth was a springboard, right,
Yeah,
to things.
yeah.
But obviously, you don't know how many of those times you're going to get. And for her, that was her only Olympics so far. But she talked about how her perspective changed. But I was wondering for you if you had any favorite chapters in the book, because there was one that actually really, really shocked me that I
Was
actually
it
thought that
John Coughlin chapter?
I was stunned at how well done.
I have to be honest, like I didn't really know about their connection. And the minute it went there, due to our own PTS, I mean, it was a horrible event for everyone involved. I'm not saying it wasn't, but it also hit us in a very specific kind of way. And I thought, oh my gosh, where is this going? Very tricky to navigate. I thought I don't know what others may think. I thought she handled it very well. She's like, these were my experiences with this person. This person helped me very much. Both things can be true. I don't know what to think and I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, she was using a lot of techniques from DBT and other forms of really sophisticated therapy when she was talking about multiple truths,
Yeah.
and I was extremely impressed.
Yeah.
And I thought that she had a lot of nuance and depth and intelligence that she's not given credit for because people will attack Gracie for the sound of her voice a lot of times.
Well, and I think also we know in such a reactive social media world that we are living in, there were times in the book where I felt they were preemptively trying to squash lashback, including even about the dog not being a rescue. And then it went into this whole disclaimer about how she will go to a rescue next time and she's learning. And like it felt like an apology almost for having bought a dog from a breeder. But this was treading very carefully. I just didn't expect that chapter.
But don't you remember that when you said that you moved to Harlem, people wrote nasty comments about that too?
Horrible things, because it was on the HGTV episode, and the comments were horrifying. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
And people take things out of context. Listen, I wrote a satirical post the other day. Someone, and it had about that this is satire, this is intentional, this is right. And someone clipped it out, put it on Reddit. So you know what? Maybe it's
yeah. But
an
I thought,
advertisement for Patreon that you didn't understand that you made, but that was satirical and not serious, but a commentary on the outrageousness of the
what's the
Russian perspective of that report. That was what that was intended to be. Okay, so yeah,
and for those who read it in real context,
they knew it.
that was
Yeah,
clear.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I was thoroughly surprised by the John Coughlin chapter. Again, now we had known because people were also reading about the book and reading excerpts and sort of stuff that we knew she talked about sexual assault and safe sport, which was also a very tricky part to then tie into the John chapter, because she
Yeah.
was talking about, you know, being raped at 4 continents in Japan, and nothing ever happened, not a thing.
Wait, I don't think that it was at 4 continents that that happened, that I thought that they said
I'm
that.
pretty sure she said it one in Japan.
Maybe like we go back, but I,
So I'm owning that that could be an error. I believe that is what she said. I am owning that there could be confusion.
yeah.
Um, but that she called the proper channels, that she had to then explain what happened to her to a bunch of old white guys that weren't getting it and were really awkward about it and then didn't do anything about it. And
Yeah.
then to send her to a competition where that skater was going to be.
Yes.
Bonkers.
Maybe it was at the skater was at the 4 continents in Japan. Yeah, but we know 2 people that were there that night at the where the event took place. So, and had heard of whispers, but not of the extent and the, you know,
Horrifying.
yeah. Um,
But then for her to then talk about John's situation, which inevitably involved safe sport and these sorts of things, she was balancing a lot. And
yeah.
I thought she navigated those very tricky waters very well.
I really was proud of her as well for the chapter on Russia because
And
over
could
the
have
years,
easily gotten by without it.
oh, I think she was like, well, I'll talk about it. Like I literally thought at the end of the thing, we like when the Valyeva the verdict came out, I was like, oh, I think we should have Gracie read it and just react. Right at that point, they are missing out.
Pages. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just loved her asides when she would be like, yeah, no, or the different things that she was saying.
Yeah, the yeah no's came a lot, and they were very perfect. She'd be like, and I love this because I think people that have been in complex situations have been told such asinine advice, where she was on the ice and someone was like, what if you just choose happiness? And she was like, oh yeah, you mean all I have to do is turn my frown upside down? Yeah, no, that's not how it works. And it was just so refreshing to have someone respond to the absurdity of such a thing. It was very powerful. I mean, I thought it was interesting her time at the Meadows, which is when she was sort of doing the therapy and all that sort of stuff. And I thought her being open about all of that was very interesting. That when she first got there, she was like, "Oh, these aren't my people," only to realize they were.
When she was at the Meadows, right before, I remember, it just dawned on me. Was it Harvey Weinstein went to the Meadows to like hide out right before then? It was some famous person was there like right before.
Oh, no, I had not known that.
And who knows how long they
I
were
know it's a famous one. I've not heard of.
in.
That's like a celebrity one.
They have equine therapy.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. I mean, I don't, you know.
It's not a state sponsored one. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
You know, I don't think it's in network, right?
Yeah. There it is. There it is. Okay. But it was interesting for her to share also. I mean, I didn't sort of start my own like self-improvement phase with therapy and all these. I do Feldenkrais and all this other sort of stuff to heal and move past certain things and grow and blah, blah, blah. I didn't really do that until my late 30s, mid 30s, somewhere around there. And fortunately, it coincided at a time where my best friend in San Francisco was making the same choice. So in a way to sort of talk about our journeys together at the same time was very helpful. I've not really done group therapy or anything like that. And it felt like I was in group therapy with Gracie for much of this book, but obviously very much so in that chapter with the lessons, some of which I have learned, some of which I have not learned. Um, it was really fascinating, like the taking ownership of certain things but not hating herself for it. It was just very profound. I thought a lot of astute observations being made about mental health in general.
What did you think about the doping chapter?
I'm trying to remember it exactly. I remember her recounting what happened in Beijing. I remember her talking about how something was so suspicious about her Sochi doping experience, where it's normally so clinical, one person, and there were just like men milling around what looked like a cocktail lounge. Um, and were you talking to Megan? One of the conversations recently about all of this is when all the Sochi stuff came out, no one felt the need to relook at any results.
Mhm.
No one looked
And
at like,
that was recent. I mean, that was the 2023 that Adelina made that comment. And there are still people that will get like very upset when you bring up, Adelina and Sochi and whatnot. But I mean, come on, if you look at those things, it's pretty obvious. And I thought it was interesting because I had just had that conversation with Phil and Christine. And I think because we are less formal than they are, listen, a lot of the information that we originally got about the doping was from the skaters themselves that are competing,
right,
right? On and off the record. And what they have seen are skaters that have trained in other countries and what they have experienced. And I thought it was really well done how she just went there because so many other athletes have talked about it off the record, but they also haven't had that venue, but they also haven't had the guts to
right,
discuss it the way that she did. And of course, these athletes are privy to a lot when many of them train with other international competitors when they get to a certain level. And I thought it was really telling a lot of the stuff that she was saying. And she had some really good points about how sophisticated Russian doping is
right.
and how it's an art that they are doing. And it was just so interesting to read it the same day that the Valyeva verdict came out. And it was almost maddening to read that verdict when there is so much evidence to the contrary, right? But she really just like she and Karen really did a great job of outlining and making a really no nonsense case. And
Right.
she also made a lot of, I think she actually made a big point to the ISU about what they've done to the sport. One, about the emotion getting taken out of the sport, right? And it's all about the rules of skating and IJS and all of these things. And I just kept thinking, like, look at how the skaters' bodies have changed over the last 10 to 15 years since the judging system, since the advent of this crazy doping. And I loved when she said that she's sick of being asked about the medal drought
Right.
because of all of the doping that takes place. And I thought that that was a really good conversation.
Yeah. She was like, you're asking the wrong question.
Mhm.
It's not why we are not on it. It's why all these other people have now magically out of nowhere from one camp started doing these ridiculous things that seemingly no one else can do just because of their national superiority, you know?
Well, we get those comments on YouTube all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just assume from uninformed people about the sport itself. Like it's absurd to think they just have one secret trick of a technique that has now allowed for all of this sort of stuff. But she also, I mean, she did also call out Alyssa even because she was talking about how this system has turned into prepubescent girls that then leave.
Hmm.
She's like, the problem is nobody sticks around.
Why would you
It-
want to?
Say it again.
Why would you want to?
Exactly.
With the current system the way it is and the current reality the way it is.
Yeah.
Hello? There, talk about self-sabotage, right? And you think about that and how that's dangerous to a sport where you need people to stay in for a long time for the highs and lows and that emotional journey and the investment in athletes and things like that. Yeah.
And you are talking about like so many coaches will repeat what they experienced. So, I mean, if all those Sambo 70 skaters become coaches, they're perpetuating the same thing. In the same way she was talking about Alex Russia practically passing out due to water torture, being sunk to the bottom of a pool to improve air capacity or, lung capacity rather, for his single men skating in the 80s or whenever the hell it was. And she was like, no, no thanks. That was, I think, another one of hers like, yeah, no, don't need to do that. It's so excessive. And what's interesting though also is as she was talking about clearly a family that was very reliant on her skating and her success, she was like, it wasn't mandatory from the family either. It was an interesting thing where they were pushing and she felt responsible for so much for them, but it didn't necessarily mean she had to win everything. She was like,
Until
it would have been this if I was just trying to achieve a double axel and that was it.
but it did seem like once they got on the train and the pressure hit everyone that they all couldn't handle it. But there were also other reasons for that about the ground not being shaky. And I thought that was interesting too, is that she made a lot of points about that she doesn't know if skating causes it or attracts it, right? And I think that there's a little bit of both there. And I was wondering for you, because obviously elite activity in anything, especially niche activities, lead to a lot of these behaviors. And I was curious from you if opera is similar to when people get towards the top.
And in what way? In that, like, it attracts a certain kind of person in that way?
Yes. I mean, obviously, and I know that, the requirements of someone's body are very different in opera.
Totally.
However, are there other behaviors in the perfectionism and this
Oh my
OCD?
gosh. What happens more in classical music is it happens in conservatory. It's less, once you sort of get to the prime time, you are able, and of course, as an adult, which is the biggest difference here. With opera, the older you are, kind of the more you're capable of, which is quite contrary to most sports, certainly in figure skating. But I think for me, I was really resonating with Gracie's no one would hear me, no one would see me. And for me, music was a way to be heard. And so even if I'm singing this thing about, whatever lofty old plot we're doing, I was channeling some sort of like rage, joy, fear, whatever it was that I could not express without that art form.
Mm.
And so I find there are many, and like skating, actually, where I would say, obviously, if Gracie had not been a skater, she would have been another kind of athlete.
Mm.
John Curry, if he had not been a skater, would have been a different kind of artist. And the same thing sort of happens in opera sometimes. People will come from more of an instrumental classical music background, and some people come from more of like a theatrical background. So I love the music first, and I tell the stage story as a result in order to be able to sing the music. My best friend Roslyn, she wants to inhabit a character top to bottom. And she was like, you are a good actor. Why do you not like it as much as the music making itself? And I was like, I feel like my whole life I have been told to be someone else. And all I want to do is be me. And now I have to pretend I'm not me again. And that was sort of my psychological thing behind it. And she said, I love acting because I get to put on a costume and not be me because I don't want to be me. And so it's sort of like it will bring up these things of why we're in this play world. For me, it finally let me express, and for her, it lets her hide and pretend something else is her reality.
See, I find music with skating allows me to express. And I enjoy doing like voiceover type stuff, but I don't like acting that much.
Because it can often, especially if it's not your words or written for you or you were born to do it, I don't like the challenge of, again, having to rob my identity because that's a thing for me.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's quite fascinating that similar things are happening in multiple art forms, who it's drawing to. And the perfectionism, will normally drown people alive in the arts. We are trained in a conservatory system, like Gracie was trained in all of these skating things. It's got to be perfect. It has to do this. You have to do da 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 da. But the problem is, there's no art in that. There's no, what I loved was when she said, and I brought it up at a lesson today because someone cacked a high note and they were horrified. And I was like, I just read this book, blah, 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 blah. And she was like, if the kids aren't falling on the ice, they're not learning and they're not trying. You have to. You have to fail in order to learn something. But for many of us, there's such that fear to be vulnerable and try something and fail at something in order to learn something that people get stuck.
I'm interested that you brought that up because I had posted something a couple of weeks ago. Dick Button made that quote about if you're not falling, you stop trying, right? And some people are like, no, if you're falling, that means bad coaching. And I'm like, oh my God, we're talking about two different things. Okay, we are talking about two different
Yeah.
about here. There, yes, okay, right. There is something about not throwing yourself into something that you're not ready for, but there are falls that you have to take when you
Yes.
are going for something.
Yeah. And quite frankly, even someone being like, well, that's the coach's fault. It's the other thing that happens is with singing in particular for me, I was up there. I didn't have my teacher like in the wings. It's like such a different kind of scenario that way. So to think that when Gracie had failed at something, at an event, at an element, whatever it was, that it was not her failure. It was also disappointing to the coach. It was also disappointing to the choreographer. It was also disappointing to the sponsors. It was also disappointing to the family. It was so much was not just her investment in it, but everyone else's. And that has to add such a complex layer to the pressure you feel.
Yeah, I thought she had interesting talks about success. And I know that as a perfectionist, I really had to think about. I remember thinking about competition, right? If someone doesn't win, I remember thinking of this. Let's say there are 30 people in a event. It's messed up if 29 of them go home destroyed, right? Like you have to find your own version of success and
Right.
your own goals and measures. And I thought that that was interesting when she was talking about how she doesn't need to win another national title. Like that's
Yeah.
not she does it. And I thought that that was a really interesting,
Well, it's
perspective.
ultimately the healthiest. I mean, again, cliche, because yes, obviously everyone wants to win, but even sometimes when she was winning, it was a hollow victory.
Mhm.
Like because it didn't fulfill what needed fulfilling.
And when
Um,
she talked about how skating is rigged to maintain the status quo, that was very true.
I didn't realize what I was benefiting from until it was gone.
Mhm.
And she's right. I mean, even in the book, she acknowledges that lack of staying power for certain personalities and names in the sport is a problem. She was like, but the judges are trying to help. They're trying to continue someone's success, and she's right,
Yeah. There were
100%.
times that I thought it was interesting how she also didn't like when commentators were overly nice about her comeback
Well,
and just
I could imagine after all she'd been through, it seemed patronizing.
yes.
Yeah. And that's what it's felt like every time, and it's the repetition of that story of like, look, she's doing her best, good for her. They're infantilizing almost.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought
But
that was
again, we were being sold a narrative, and I'm not saying it was from Gracie because it was not coming from Gracie, but it was all this constant like, things got rough but everything's good now. We heard that every event after that Boston Worlds. And I was like, in no way is someone just turned around and all great from this, because as she mentioned, everyone thought that like I didn't win a medal at Boston in Boston was the problem. She was like, but no one was asking me what the problem was that ultimately led to that. And that was the missing piece of the puzzle for the public.
yeah, there were a couple of things that I was wondering about. I was curious, she didn't mention how the coaches responded to her dark period. And that would have been interesting. Uh,
As in Marina and Oleg in Detroit.
right, yeah, because they also didn't know her that well for that long period of time, and how are they going to react during that
And she
time?
even said, she was like, maybe people at the ring just thought this is what I always did. But again, if she's missing sessions, I mean, now who knows what of that she was sharing as she was reading it. I mean, it was reading like a textbook example of all those issues. And she had only nice things to say about
Mhm.
Marina and Oleg. Like
Mhm.
when I came, they weren't judgmental. They were always fine. They kind of let me do my thing. And um, it was really interesting that
Yeah.
no one felt the need to intercede. And the Champs Camp story was particularly like about everyone just basically thinking she needed to be knocked down a peg when it was so the opposite situation. And then finally through tears she's screaming, don't you realize I'm asking for help?
Mhm.
And just whoop.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And she said that they had the attitude that she was disrespectful to the sport at that point in time.
yeah,
At that point in time, it was so clear that things were going off the rails
right.
over a long
But then
period.
again, even when we would try to bring something up like that, everyone was mad because they were like, you're an asshole. And it
Mhm.
was like, no, I think the people who are assholes in the situation are saying she should keep going and ignore her problems, or she has so many gifts, why is she squandering them? Or she has it better than most, so she should just shut up and deal with it. That to me is horrifying. The idea that someone might need help is not a criticism or a weakness. It's just like, uh, screw Skate America, get the girl some help.
Well, anytime that we've talked about someone's jump technique and how it's being set up to fail them and set up for a gigantic crisis as soon as they gain weight, we've always been called assholes.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
always. Yulia, Alyssa Lou, Isabeau. I mean, it's the same conversation every time. You're like, where were you? Like, what are you? But a lot of people don't know, and a lot of people don't want to be educated. And then a lot of people are like, well, the Russians are doing it. And you're like, yeah, and the Russians are on drugs, right? But this is clear. So, yeah. I honestly think in the wake of the Valyeva verdict in this book, there's a lot of discussions that need to be had at that
Well, and
point.
I have to say then, as a result of that, I was impressed but perplexed that it's being promoted by USFS.
Jonathan,
They need any publicity?
yes, but
USFS doesn't look great in this book.
don't you think they're afraid of Gracie?
They should be.
They let her on TV to talk about it.
Right,
She's too big of a star that they can't.
right,
And she's too beloved and bold that they can't.
right.
And she told Tara and Johnny that they were going to be discussed in the book when she was on TV with them. There was a little exchange there.
And she really what I appreciated was she was like real rich coming from Tara, who never competed after age 15, who never had to go through the struggles I'm going through with a changing body, with like all these sorts of hormonal changes, all of these mental illnesses, for her to be so dismissive about my work ethic or whatever it was, or attitude, was ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Johnny clearly had a rock bottom season or two where I wonder how he would reflect on that now.
Yeah.
Uh, because remember, he didn't really go there in his book. His whole book was whether or not he was going to tell people he was gay. That was the point of his book, right? But he didn't go there. But remember in 2006, 2007, it was like watching free fall with him.
Right.
But it's interesting when you hear the commentators, people do turn on people when they stop skating well.
Well, and
And
that was that line from I, Tanya, when she's like, America loved me when I landed the triple axel, but more, they don't really want someone to love. They really love someone to hate. And she's like, and when I became that person, like the floodgates open. And I felt the same about Johnny. Everyone was all too ready to knock him down.
mm-hmm. Yes. Remember, he made a comment that he hated the IJS spins or he hated spinning, and people like attacked him for that. It's in his documentary. And which I think people obviously they were talking about way more than spinning, right? Like I think they were seeing his talent and they were wanting him to realize it, but the way that it's expressed in that comment, like they're talking about the spin, but they're not really talking about the spin,
Right.
right? So I think that was that whole situation. Yeah. And everyone has their own triggers, right?
Yeah, and she really let Tara have it. She was kinder to Johnny later when she acknowledged that he too had been brutalized by the system in ways.
Yeah. I would be interested to hear her commentate because she has so many thoughts about how people should be talked about, but she really went into the press too. And that's a very difficult thing because there does become, when people become well known, there is this chasm that happens that you hate the press. But like, of course you hate the press, right? But she did say something that I thought was so funny, but maybe not the most informed, is when she said, well, you have to write for a newspaper. I mean, I would love to be in a helicopter talking about traffic. But at the same time, Karen Krause, New York Times
Yeah,
writer. So, right. But it was just, she's allowed to have her opinion. So
and
there's that.
had several.
Although, listen, and the media is not all one size fits all. So.
Yeah. What was interesting compared to other skating books we've read, Johnny's included, is she never felt it seemed slighted by judges. That was never a part of her story, really. She delivered, she was rewarded. If she didn't, she wasn't. It didn't seem like she had to face a lot of uphill adversity with that aspect of the sport, which it's predominantly the bulk of so many other skating memoirs.
I don't want to use the word talent. She does not like the word talent. Her jumping ability and skating prowess was so undeniable that when she delivered,
You couldn't help but give it to her.
you had to give it to her.
Yeah. Even, I went down a YouTube rabbit hole.
She doesn't want to be called talented and she doesn't want to be called pretty. She said, what? I won the genetic lottery. And
yeah.
I understand that because she has
Nothing to do with
worked extremely hard to get where she is.
Yeah. And there is a discussion we've had in opera sometimes about the burden of talent. It often isn't a gift. It can often be a burden. This obligation, this feeling, this constant fear, you have squandered this, or you're supposed to love every minute of this, and blah, 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 blah. And that was coming in loud and clear in her book, that it felt, these are my words now, that it seemed to her more of a burden than a gift at times. The expectation of using it, of maximizing it, of celebrating it, nightmare.
Yeah. I did think it was really funny when she was talking about people trying to wish her well when something really bad happens. And I thought it was funny because I'm like, so.
But it's true. I mean, we were even, are you ready for this? Like at night when I'm just ready to sort of like unwind and not really think, I will put on Junior Bake Off. Have you ever seen Junior Bake Off? There are some sassy, hilarious little British kids on there just like making some great, great jokes. Oh my gosh, where was I going? Oh, and at the end of the episode, obviously, someone gets voted off. And I had just finished Gracie's book. I'm like watching to like sort of lighten the mood and get a little like fluffy again. And one of the little kids gets voted off, and it's so personal for them, and they always cry. And the first thing everyone around them does is say, don't cry, but you did so well. Look how far you made it. Da, 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 da. And it was hearkening right back to Gracie being like, yeah, I'm sure all of that is true. I'm really upset right now. Can I just be really upset right now? I bombed. I got voted off Junior Bake Off. Like, it's okay for that to suck right now.
She made a lot of really good points about people being uncomfortable with big emotions. But obviously the depth of emotion corresponds with the depth of effort that you
Yes.
put into something.
Yes.
I thought it's-
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to hear again, we were always sort of being forced to fill in the gaps because we weren't getting full stories during much of her career. Certainly not to the extent at which she shared it now. And so even hearing things like about the throwing away of the team jacket and like all this sort of stuff,
And she didn't remember some of that.
and I believe her.
Yeah, I believe. Oh,
She talked a lot about being in a fugue state.
I remember the whole scene because Lynn Plage was the one who went over to her. And it was like, and Lynn is like this like tiny grandmother who's going over there. And she's so, well, you've met Lynn and she's so like proper and professional. Gracie, do you want to think about what you're going to talk to the press about?
We'd be
And
like, why don't we go to a room? Go to a room for a second. Like she told her one student, like, go to the bathroom, cry it out, come out when you're ready.
Max Aaron, same nationals, stormed past everyone, went to a room, and then came back.
And that is fair.
Yes.
That is 100% fair, and they should be afforded that opportunity to sort of like collect themselves before immediately being inundated. Oh my gosh, when we were like judging those 1980s Olympics, or all the ones through the 80s, where they have just received their Olympic scores, good or bad, and then bam, microphone in the face. It's like Peggy being like, "You fell. How'd you feel?" And I would be like, "Get the hell out of my face! I just found out."
I thought it was interesting. She remembered something a little bit differently than it was covered at the time. There was a lot of drama that was being written about in the press during Boston Worlds because people had been to the practice, and she didn't write about it in her book, and I wasn't sure if she was going to. I remember it was like actually a little scandalous. I don't know if it was on Ice Network or NBC, but it was, for the official channels that tend to sanitize this stuff in that way that she talks about. One of the people, it must have been the day before or the day of the long, she and Frank were at a practice and he told her not to do something and she like went to do it and missed. And I just remember it was like written about in very tense terms.
Oh.
And it wasn't in the book and I wasn't sure if it was going to be because she said that like Boston was like very calm, but I had remembered that happening and the website is down, but and I don't know if someone that watches this will remember it, but that was something that was discussed at the time.
Well, even, I mean, to me, even though I know it didn't end the way anyone wanted it to, she won the short program at Worlds. And it was interesting in the book. To me, it's a big moment. I would think you winning the short program at the World Championships going into the long affects a lot. And she just glossed right over it. She was like, so I got to Boston. I was heading first into the free skate. And I was like, whoa, I feel like we missed a lot. I wanted to hear about that short program.
Oh, and she admitted that her short programs were not good that year. But this is so, she talked about Scott Brown. Okay. I remember this like it was yesterday.
And we picked up on what she was saying about Scott Brown right away. I mean, you could smell that a mile away.
2016 Nationals press conference, free skate. Gracie and Ashley both skated their socks off in the free. They did not skate well in the short program. Remember Paulina won the short?
Right.
I asked them, what are you going to do to, improve the short program before Worlds? Thinking like that's an objective question, being
Of
like,
course it is. Yeah.
you all just nailed the free skate. You're a short program away from winning, right? And I remember at that time, I was like, I want to ask a good question, right? Scott Brown goes, he should be thrown out for asking that. Blah-da-da. And he said it, and Ann Jensen and Frank were behind. And Frank's like, that's his job, right?
Yes, and it's the only real question probably being asked. What are we going to hear more about someone's costumes or why they chose lyrics for their music that year?
But I remember knowing that we were in trouble when I asked that, and he reacted that way.
Yeah.
He was very politically in favor at the time.
Whatever happened?
Remember, he was working with all the Canes and working with everyone in the Midwest, right? Like, there's a certain thing in skating.
Bad. It was bad. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I wasn't even talking about his choreographic work.
Oh, I am.
I don't remember it.
But what happened to him?
I mean, he's around.
Is he?
I mean,
The name hasn't come up in a long time.
do you miss him?
We called out.
Do you miss him?
Say it again.
Do you miss him?
No. I was hoping there was some penance in there.
Isn't he the one that gave Gracie that program to she was young, the beautiful sad music of oh my god, La Vita Life is Beautiful, right? And I get to the footwork sequence and she's like, this at the time, you're like, not the moves that I would give during that. I remember Jeremy
was really we want to evoke. Yeah. Well, I mean, she admits she was like total opportunist. Like, I'm appreciative he put me in touch with Frank, but like, what? And then even as like we did with the John Curry ones, like I went down a whole YouTube rabbit hole rewatching certain Gracie programs and all that sort of stuff. And you see how he is loud. Congratulations, I'm so proud of you. Like bogarting Frank's access to her and making sure he hugged her first. And you even see she's like, what? Okay, hi, Scott. Okay. There was such an opportunity there for him.
I remember we had a discussion that we felt like Linda should have been at the boards with Frank at that time. And it was relayed to Frank, not in the way that it was said at the time. And because thinking that it would like balance the energy. Remember when it seemed like there was a disconnect between them and it was around and yeah.
Maybe a female energy that has been through this, that can empathize with it, could just be a different energy there. Yeah.
And who doesn't love Linda? She's fabulous.
Right? Was he worried she couldn't see over the rink barrier?
I don't know. Have you talked to her lately? I mean, she's in love with you.
I mean, I love that woman. I saw her like one of the last times I went to LA, but it's been a while. It's been a while.
I sent her the clip of Karen Cortland Kelly talking about Linda and how glamorous she is. I did see her dress in the Lake Placid Museum, and it's so funny that it was thought of as being like so sparkly and whatnot. It looks like, by today's standards, that dress looks like an art project, right? Based on what?
From 6 or the one from 80?
One from 80, based on what skating dresses have become.
It was the one from 76 that looked even more glitzy, I felt.
And 79 too, right? 79 was fabulous, yeah.
Okay. The 76 Olympic free skate one was like, whoa.
I will just say that this is the thing where people automatically assume that someone who's good at skating is a good coach, or someone who's good at skating is a good person, right? She talked about a Russian Olympic champion being kicked out of the Toyota Center.
We're talking about Gracie, back to Gracie's book, you're saying. Yeah.
There was a Russian Olympic champion in the background of those videos, and we filmed Gracie at that time.
Yeah, not too hard to put it together. Olympic men's champion from Russia who happened to be there.
Who also like had their own rink, but it wasn't full size or something. Yeah, I don't.
It had just gotten divorced. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah.
All those comments. And again, the sad part of some of that is it's not just that skater, I keep trying not to say his name, was an asshole. It's that he is a product of a system that encouraged it and perpetuates it. That that is the common fodder back at those rinks. Mm-hmm. Like he'd come and be like, nice fat ass. Could you imagine? Yeah. Horrible.
I did think when Gracie was talking about herself, so Galina used to talk about like the personality of a champion, and she used to be like, you know, Nancy's just so good for a champion because she always looked like she smelled something. And I remember Gracie in the beginning of the book, she talked about being on the soccer field or something that she did and thinking like,
Where she like beat up the boy.
yeah, and you're like,
Yeah.
that's a girl that can do a triple lutz, triple toe under pressure. Okay, that is right there. Okay.
You know what chapter was not included in John Curry's biography? That story.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one. Put her in the ring. Yeah.
Well, what was also interesting in like thinking about that is when we knew her from the Alex days, she was this incredible athlete, but she really talks about the transformation really being more cosmetic and about packaging and less about like the work with Lori and maybe about how to be more artistic on the ice wasn't really a subject matter of it. She was mainly like the main changes were just cosmetic. It wasn't about, she didn't talk much about like taking on like the higher PCS score and stuff.
She went there about his drinking and he remember because Brian Mueller was there at the time telling us about how he wouldn't be showing up at the rink. And when she described his smell, and then she's like, and then I learned it was cognac. I was like, oh my God. Okay.
She's like, I thought it was cologne at first until I was adult and like was at like some bar and was like, oh my gosh, I know that smell.
And
Yeah.
remember, we asked him once about when he would throw stuff, and he was like, and she would throw it back at me too. And she admitted that in the book about how they would.
She was a child. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So just spoiler alert. But again, you know, a
Yeah, but
product.
there's also like a coaching method in it. So it's so funny. I was telling someone about a story that happened at the rink once when I was real stressed and real pissed, right? And I was like, no, I walked out of a lesson once. And this person goes, oh, that's really normal with Russian speaking people. I mean, who cares? Right? Like, and it was like true. Like it was just like
Normal. Yeah.
we skated together the next day, like
It didn't happen. And that's what she was saying all the time. Like either at home with the family after an explosion or on the ice with Alex. It's like, you just go back and just keep going. And to me, I'm like, I can't pivot that fast. Like I am in a way right now. I can't imagine just pretending none of that just happened. Nuts. Nuts. And again, someone like him is probably coaching kinder and more compassionately than he was coached. But it's like, it's still outrageously inappropriate.
well, he
You
was
know,
coached by Stanislav Zhuk.
who was notoriously a terror,
Yes.
just horrible. And all of this for what? I mean, that's the other thing. And she even said that at one point. She's like, "What's all this for? Like another medal?"
Do you remember when she was live tweeting from Nationals in 2018? When she was in that very dark place. And
She brought
Tomoki
up
Hiwatashi
the
was
photo.
what?
Remember, they took
Yes.
the picture, and this they did her dirty. They
Yeah.
knew that was an unflattering photo of a casual spectator. That was an unflattering angle of a photo, and it was in front of a skating crowd, and they blasted it on the jumbotron, and then she posted it. What was her side by side? Was it Humpty Dumpty?
Or the moon or something. I mean, it
It
was
was a
really
moon. You are absolutely right. It was like a moon face next to hers.
Tomoki Hiwatashi was on the ice, and she was like, "Oh, the one person Alex yelled at more than me."
She and then I think they shut it down. But her tweets were really the star of the event in some ways that year.
Um, someone quoted it to me today that they said that they joined Twitter because people were talking about her tweets, and that someone's name was Jeffrey, and she was like, "Oh, that was the name of my so of my horse in equine therapy, my support animal." However she worded it was like,
Yeah,
and she has a dark humor. That's
coping mechanism. Let her use it, you know.
but remember when like when Andrea Joyce interviewed her one day and she was like, did she say something about that competing at nationals again was like, well, it's like surviving a plane crash and going in for round two. And I was like,
Again, she doesn't deliver it like she's delivering a singer. It's completely dry, which is what can be, I think, for someone like an Andrea Joyce, so unnerving.
although I enjoy any good Frank Carroll's story about how stuffy he is. And when he referred to, they said, and we were talking backstage about Whoopi Goldberg, and she was saying about how he said it was such a shame that she smoked the devil's lettuce.
Yes.
I would have still been laughing on the ice after that. Like, I just would not have been able to function.
At one point when she was like, I just wanted to take the damn fedora and stomp on it, or whatever she said.
Well,
Yeah.
part of the thing is like, okay, Christine. Christine painted this book of when she would talk about Frank, Carol, Michelle, and Lori, and she'd be like, it was like the Holy Trinity, right? And it was like written in these glowing terms. You know, he said some foul shit to her when she was getting to the top. That is how this works, good, bad, or ugly, right? And it was painted as though he were a complete saint, which is not accurate. So
Yeah. It was interesting when Gracie
I have a friend who, this is so funny, but my friend Luis Hernandez will tell you about when he was training with Frank. You know, this, he was there when Michelle left and what was going on before, you know, during and after, as was, you know, the dear Tim Gable. And like these, a lot of these skaters love Frank. Some have other opinions, right? Of course, Frank, apparently Lewis like mopped up the ice once, and Frank went to his father and goes, but at least you still have a gorgeous boy. Like,
I mean, what was interesting was when she talked, she kept using a term I was less familiar with, because she wasn't saying she was having thoughts of suicide. She called it suicide
ideation.
ideation. And she talked about the guilt of Frank and Christopher Bowman was
Yes.
also something on front of mind.
Well,
And I think like even for Frank, like the trauma of having gotten close and having had that situation, I mean, it's right out of a movie. Of course you are going to keep a distance moving forward.
I talked to his Olympic roommate about it one night in Potsdam when we drove 2 hours in the you know,
Christopher
backwoods
Bowman's Olympic from Calgary or Albertville?
in Calgary. You know,
Okay.
he roomed with Paul. What the hell were they doing rooming together?
Yeah.
But
Weird.
no, they like were very good friends.
Okay.
You know, so much alike. And it was a gigantic open secret that he was on drugs.
Oh, yeah. I
And
mean, everyone knew. Yeah.
when they one year there was speculation one year when he pulled out of nationals that there was a drug test, you know, that they made sure that he would not have to be tested so that he could still go to
And
worlds.
it definitely wasn't a performance enhancing drug he would have been testing positive for. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think,
But even Frank had talked about at some point, maybe this was in Tyler Cranston's one of his books,
oh wait,
where he was like, he's talking about like Frank had sent Christopher to get a program from like Sarah Kawahara and came back and Frank was like, all right, let's see the program. And he just like skated around in a circle and kind of did this. And he was like, where the hell were you? And then he called Sarah and he was like, yeah, he never showed up. It would just like disappear for these moments. It was bonkers. Another quote that I often think of from that same Tyler Cranston book, it's the one where he just talks shit about people, goes chapter by chapter, and it's just a person's name. I can't remember what that one was called. But he talked about Christopher Bowman, and he was like, Christopher always thought the ice rink was his prison, and he just needed to be done skating so he could be free. And Tyler, who sounds both interesting and very problematic, was like, he didn't know that skating was the only thing saving him at that time. And even in Gracie, when she was like, I got to the point where it was like, look what skating has done to me. And then by the end of the book, she has a different perception on that and what skating is to her.
There is a book about Thaler that's in the works. I don't know if it was published yet. Sandra had to write something about it, and someone else told me that they wrote something about their recollections with Thaler.
Okay.
That's an interesting personality we're going to have to, you know, John Curry and Thaler. We could say they were rivals, right? Yeah.
Yeah, in the purest sense, in every sense of the word, they were rivals. Even in the John Curry book at the end, when he was like, "Oh yeah, Thaler was there, like 20 years after the fact or whatever it was, or 15. I guess it wouldn't be 20, but like early 90s or something." And Thaler's like, "Oh, are you talking to me, John? Oh, are you going to look me in the eye this time?" Very, very funny. Very funny. What?
Which queen do you think was bitchier in that dynamic? I mean, both.
Hard to say. I think John was sort of this like uptight, pretentious, like above you bitch, and I think Thaler was like an out there, like more wild version. What's fascinating is
perfect for like perfect rivals, right? For each other.
I adore them both for totally
it's
different.
The same way. You could not cast a better crop of 4 girls than Paulina, Gracie, Ashley, and Mariah. I'm sorry. There needs to be a series on them. Okay, they are all incredible women in their own regard. Okay, and if not for doping, what could they have achieved, right? And you think about the period of time that they were in.
You had been giving Gracie what those Russians were on, she'd have been quad Lutzen all over the place day one.
Were on? Anyway.
Yeah, sorry, I meant her competitors at the time, but yeah.
Yeah.
Bonkers.
Bonkers. Right? Yes. I love when a skater can't pronounce the names
any of her competitors' names. I didn't even want to bring it up because she's, again, I cannot give the book enough credit for how wonderful it was. And her reading it was so special. But I was like, do you know not? I mean, what are you, Canadian? I'm only joking because we've often had Canadian friends on that really can't pronounce anyone's names. And she was among them. Like Lipnitskaya, Medvedeva, several names.
Nathan's book was so boring and so depressing, and he looked about as enthusiastic doing it as he did on any of his recent talk show appearances after he won a gold medal. And he couldn't pronounce Tim Gable's name when he did and I was like,
did he say Goebel?
I was done with the book. Okay, I was done. I was like, all right, like we're good. Okay.
Yeah. Also, how did no one check that? Like, if you're producing like an audiobook, like maybe that's one of the jobs is to make sure the names are being pronounced correctly. Especially if like that was the one before you in the world of quads. Yeah. Could you imagine Ilya coming out with a book and talking about Nathan Chan? You know, like it would be horrible.
I like how she was like, Nathan gave an honest answer to something and was ruined, which is true.
Yeah, about the gay commentary.
Yes, and he was asked a pointed question that then was chopped up and...
Yes. And the Fanyus were all too excited to sort of like let that bury him. We had the discussion at the time. I found nothing offensive about it. I felt he was in a conversation, and I understand how someone could have wondered what that meant, but I did not find it offensive. And, you know, she made a disclaimer for it. Nathan came out right away and was like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. Like, because it was something about like, just the connotation of what he was saying, but I was with him. I did not take offense.
The other day, Megan Duhamel messages me. Did I say anything rude or offensive on the interview the other day? And I was like, well, according to whom? Did I say anything that Skate Canada would be mad at? I don't know. Are they mad?
That seems like, scary.
You're like, what could they be mad? They pick arbitrary things, federations, to be mad at. I was like, I don't know. What could they be mad at? The fact that they made you do transportation? Oh no, they're fine with that. Oh,
the new Skate Canada Uber driver, Megan Duhamel. Oh, just move those Olympic gold medals on the back seat. Just sorry.
Listen, I was nice and took it out. Whatever they were mad at, I was just like, I'll cut out a couple of it. Who cares? Everybody saw it already. You know, like,
Wait, you went back and edited it?
do you want Megan Duhamel on your behind asking you to
Of
take it
course
out?
not. But it was about the driving?
No.
Oh, something else. Got it. Got it.
Something completely arbitrary and obvious. That, of course, right? And I'm like,
but again, everybody's ready to pounce. And I do appreciate, because I don't know how Megan puts up with that Twitter backlash, like the Russian bots against her on Twitter. It seems horrifying. And I remember Gracie in the book talking to Frank about like social media hate. It's like, well, it's just like when I would receive like hate mail in the mail and I would just not read it. And she was like, it's not really a letter that's been mailed to me. It's being blasted all over the internet for everyone to see, and I see it when I open my computer. This is not a fair comparison.
how do you handle it? Because we get it, and you get it in opera.
Yeah, because of my separation to this sport, it feels less personal. In the beginning, it used to bother me because I felt like so many people were misunderstanding, and I really felt the need to like clarify so they understood, until I realized that further engagement only made it worse. In opera, we are taught never to read our reviews. It's one of the few fields. It's not like musical theater or other instruments in classical music where the review will make or break you. If you get a bad review on Broadway for your show, the show's closing. All of the operas at the Met, predetermined dates. It's running for as long as it's contracted for. It's not open to negotiation. Now, having said that, we all frickin' look at them. But it's also about taking into account who the source is. So quite frankly, the way I always talked about TSL to the opera people is I was like, it's the kind where, because they were like, well, what would you do if you ran into a skater you had said something negative about? And this is something I actually wrote Lindsay Thorngren back in the day. I was like, I would like to apologize for what I said. I would also like to encourage you not to listen to me. You're not supposed to listen to me. You have a team. You have a point of view. Like, please never take anything a random opera singer is saying as something that should make you doubt yourself or anything. Like, I don't know. Same thing with the reviews in opera. Like, a lot of those people don't sing, but they are in the audience.
This is the one thing I was going to say to Gracie about it, not to her, about like when someone doesn't have a good program, there's almost nothing that they are going to want to hear that the person said.
No.
Okay.
So don't go looking. That's a glutton for punishment moment.
And everybody looks. Everybody looks. Right. The only, well, it's interesting. There are certain people that just like write the same hate comment every week, like no matter what, and you know the names, and then people like don't
know what's coming.
And then there are people like, I never read the YouTube comments. I'm like, who, right? Like, why would I want to waste my time reading what like someone wrote? But like people love it, like they love to read it. I'm like, why? Right? Because like a lot of times,
well, every now and then something interesting will come up, or someone will post a link to something, or it can continue the conversation. Usually, it's like, especially in the beginning, it's some Russian bot being like, these homos just hate everything Russian. Or
it's some gay guy that's just like competitive or whatever, right? But
yeah,
the only times that like it's really weird is if people have gotten mad at me, and I don't know if you have this experience, for something that you said or something that Law has said. One time, someone's mother got so mad at me because Law didn't like their costume. And like, it was not about what it was about, but that skater's mother like went in and I said, but I didn't say it. And they're like, that's your show. And I was like,
what do you think? We have a producer editing all of it? Like, come on.
Also, like, I'm not policing your opinion. You can think whatever you want to think, right?
Yeah.
And then remember when Doug Haas said something?
Oh boy, do I ever.
And then Ashley Kane, like, I hadn't even seen it, was like talking about us and like that kind of a thing. Oh my God. we had to like call Alyssa Disney to have a conversation. Like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and then when you didn't like Samson and Delilah, Jonathan, I was home with COVID. And like it was like in the middle of the rink, like at the time. But do you remember 2017 Worlds? We're covering it. Chris Kanyum's father dies. And we're like, La? Because you know she has a thing about that pair. I was like, go easy. I don't care that his dad died. He can't land his jumps. And I was like, La, just, oh dear God, this is not the moment. Oh my God. And I
Yeah. Again, as Gracie pointed out, both things can be true.
Both things can be
One can be devastated that he lost. I can't imagine. I can't.
But how many people watch skate? This is always weird because there are the people that just watch skating as a sport, and there are people that just watch skating to like the people and cry, and then there are the people that watch it for everything, right?
Yeah.
For the sport, the art, but those audiences each have their own point of view.
It's true. And again, it's the marriage of both. And Gracie, even as an athlete, was really at times embodying both sides of the sport. It's fascinating we bring this up and it sort of goes to this criticism because I don't know if you remember, there's like some weird random guy in Philadelphia who must have like gone to Gracie's rink to like watch her sort of begin this comeback. And when she went to regionals,
oh yeah,
it was after we said something about the costume because I remember I was in Hong Kong at the time doing it. He was so mad that I said something about the costume that he kept writing me to be like, I saw you perform in concert in Philadelphia and you forgot a word once. And I was like, I sure did. That's a true story. I 100% did that.
He's invited me to go take from his coach, but it was like worded in a certain way at first. I think he's just like a bold person, right? And it was worded in such a way where sometimes people say things I'm like, well, I have a coach. I'm happy with my situation. And also, I'm picking who I want to work with. I don't want you to pressure me into working with someone. I'm trying to make certain deliberate choices for certain deliberate reasons. And if you want to talk to me about it, I'll gladly talk to you about what I want to do and why.
Yeah.
But it was not, the conversation was not had like that. No.
And I finally had to like.
He's also written to me about you in the past too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he would be like, oh, remember that? And I was like, yep, we've talked about it. I definitely forgot a word, and that has nothing to do with Gracie Gold. It's like, this is the weirdest thing. But she even talked about like weird stalker guys at her rink in Philadelphia. And I am convinced that's how she feels about this person, but I lost.
Have you ever had someone ask to watch you practice?
Well, it's so different for the singing because if I'm warming up, it's a very private moment, and when you're practicing, it's usually under like closed things. For skating, it would be totally different. But so I mean, no.
It's always like, well, the rink's open, like sure, but like, okay,
yeah. Yeah.
But like, I'm also not putting on a performance, you know, like it's just like it is what it is.
Well, and it ultimately changes, and that's what I really appreciate Gracie in the book being like, I was out there just trying to remember how to like skate around, and little girls were being like, everyone here hates you.
You know what's weird in Lake Placid? People will walk in the rink to like have, because it's like an Olympic venue, so they will walk in the rink to like watch practice randomly as like a historic site, like they're on a walking tour, like I don't know, right?
Oh, okay.
And then I was like walking to get coffee or grab lunch or something. Someone's like, I saw you practicing today. And I was like
feels invasive, doesn't it? Yeah.
It was invasive. People in small towns are way more openly friendly, and that's not considered weird up there. What's considered weird in New York or New Jersey to acknowledge that you saw someone practice is like very weird when people are just like friendly like that, and you're like, wait, whoa, okay, like,
yeah.
Or like we are at a cash register and people ask you questions about yourself, and like what would be considered weird here because like, you know, you're taught to be on guard and everything. And people are like, oh, where are you from? Oh, where are you staying? And I was like, do you want my social security number? Like, what do you like?
Yeah, and that subtext in my head always is like, I'm not really looking for new friends. Thanks, though. You just give me my change. Yeah.
Well, like sometimes you meet interesting people, but you're right. But just like, oh my God. Okay. Where's this?
It's not for the most of the introverts. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh.
I was at the bank recently and I had stayed over my parents, which is like a half hour away. And they were asking me questions because of fraud. And I felt like I was at the principal's office. And I'm
I know
like,
you feel like you're in trouble even when you know it's you.
I was depositing a savings bond, which, like, you know, those savings bond that you would get like
Yep.
for your first communion that you
Yep.
don't even remember that you have. And it's like, oh, like I have to deposit this. And they were asking me so many questions, like for fraud, because it's not my home branch. But I'm like, and I was like, I'm depositing.
Yeah. Again, if anyone wants to come deposit in my account, please let them.
Please let them. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
But like they were asking me, and I was like, why do I feel like I'm at the principal's office? They're like,
Yeah.
oh, where do you work? Oh, what do you do? Oh,
It's anytime I cross the border. What do you
like,
do?
I was like, do you care? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm depositing a savings bond. I got it from my first communion. Do you want to like know what I think about the Catholic
Picture me
Church?
with that savings fund. That's
And then I was like, I was sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, I hope no one ever gets me a savings bond. And then the interest came for it. And I was like, I hope everybody gets me a savings bond. That was fabulous.
Yeah, it's so funny. I had like cashed some finally, like back when I turned 30. And I was like, oh yeah, because as a kid, you're like, thanks, what is this? I don't know what this is. Like da 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 da. But yeah, there you have it. But
I don't know how we got to savings bonds, but maybe we should wrap this up, Jonathan. This is, yeah.
we got there. We got there. I hope this book goes over well. I'm glad to see USFS endorsing it. I am very intrigued to get other.
Are you glad? I feel sure. Glad that they did it.
It's blowing the lid off of some stuff.
Listen, I hope this book gets a lot of exposure beyond US figure skating. That's
Agreed.
my
Agreed. I think it's an important read for everyone. A remarkable journey of mental health. So
yes. So people should join TSL Visionaries, right? They can talk.
oh my gosh, because then we're going to talk about Nureyev, most famously from his Muppet Show Swine Lake.
Oh, of course, we're gonna watch it. Please. So basically, and if people don't notice, this is set up so that you're the leader.
Oh yeah, look at it, taking the lead.
I was like
conversation, and what was nice, like when we all met for the John Curry one, other people are contributing. We're watching the relevant clips that come up. So I had a blast during the John.
Andia was loving you. Okay, she
yes, loved her.
Yes, and people were just chiming in, and
yeah,
yeah,
it's lovely. Fun. Much more lively than the book clubs I recall my parents having growing up.
It was great, and then we tried to like show clips, and everybody was watching, and yeah, it was great. It was a good
shared experience.
It was a good shared experience. Yeah. You can join in the links below and hold an edge and look sexy, everyone.
Bye, guys.